The following is a presentation from the MJCast, the internet's premier podcast on all things Michael Jackson.
I'm a Black American. I am proud of who I am.
Together, we can make a change in the world.
I want to see you!
I like to take sounds and put them under the microscope.
There's a driving bass, you become the bass. Let the music write itself.
I don't sing it if I don't mean it.
Welcome to the MJCast, your source of news, discussion, and interviews on the King of Pop.
Hello and welcome to episode 176 of the MJCast. I'm your host, Elise Capron, signing in from Studio San Diego, and I'm so pleased today to be joined by my co-host and longtime friend of the show, Paul Black, who is a film editor and mega MJ fan, and who has been on the podcast quite a bit recently, including this fall when he hosted our fantastic McGarris interview, which you should definitely check out if you haven't heard, and also appeared in our most recent episode, our launch of season 11 with Jamin and Charlie Thompson. Paul, welcome to the show. How's everything with you in Sydney?
Good morning, everybody. It's early here in Sydney. I'm doing pretty good. Great to be here and ready to go.
Well, we're so pleased to have you, and thank you for all you do and for pulling the morning shift, as is so often the case with our Australian crew. We appreciate it.
No worries.
And now to move on to our special guest for today, I am very pleased to welcome Brad Sundberg to the show. Really, Brad, we love you. Most of our listeners know Brad pretty well at this point, but just in case you're new to the show, let me give a brief introduction. Brad Sundberg joined Michael Jackson's studio team during the production of Captain EO, my personal fave, in 1985, and would stay on as one of his engineers and technical director for nearly 18 years. He worked on the Bad, Dangerous, History, and Blood on the Dance Floor albums. He is also responsible for pretty much all the music and video systems installed in every corner of Neverland Valley Ranch, both indoors and outdoors. I'm talking speakers set up in rocks, up in trees, in Michael Jackson's dance studio, everywhere you can imagine. For more than a decade, Brad has been running the In the Studio with MJ events, which take place around the world and which give insights into working with the King of Pop in the studio. I'm personally a big fan of these events and have attended the LA dates for many years now. Brad has joined us for several episodes in the past, and for this episode today, we decided to open up our Q&A style format to him. So this past week, as a lot of you know, we welcomed questions from listeners across all social media platforms, and we've collected all of those for Brad to answer. I'll talk about the format more in just a moment. But first, Brad, welcome. We're so happy to have you, and how's everything with you in sunny Florida?
Elise, it's so good to be back. Thank you. You neglected to say I put speakers in the reptile barn also at Neverland, but that's okay.
That's a great story.
It's a beautiful day in Florida. Good to see you, Paul.
Hey,
And looking forward to returning to your beautiful country here in a couple weeks.
happy to have you.
I even wore my Bluey shirt just for you, and turns out that we're not doing video today, but it's all good. So I'll bring Bluey with me on the flight.
Yeah, you're going to have to send us a picture of your Bluey shirt because I have a 3-year-old and there's a lot of Bluey in our house and we really love it.
I can't get sidetracked already, but we were just on a Disney cruise and it was Marvel Day at Sea. And all these, grown-ups and kids are dressed up like their favorite Marvel characters. I mean, it's cool, but it's silly. And I wore my Bluey shirt, just sort of like, just to be dumb. And everybody loved it. We love Bluey. I was the total misfit and it was wonderful.
I love that.
All right, I'll stay on track.
So, as mentioned, this is a Q&A style episode so that we can really dig into some of the stories that Brad maybe hasn't had a chance to talk about in other episodes. And I want to say first that we have received 3 to 4 times as many questions as we could possibly get through, unless you guys want to sit through an 8-hour episode. So my sincere apologies to anyone whose question we can't include in this episode. I'm actually going to pass those questions on to Brad after. So if he has any who spark some interest for him later, maybe he can address those in his Facebook group. By the way, if you are not part of Brad's In the Studio Facebook group, go join that. There's tons of cool stuff that happens over there.
Don't forget my Instagram and TikTok people too.
Of course, Instagram and TikTok as well. We also did receive some similar questions. So some we have merged into one question if it was asked by multiple people. And we've also condensed a few questions where we really felt like we had to. So also just about every single person has conveyed their appreciation to you, Brad, and thanks for what you do, and had lots of gushing within their entries. So we've cut some of that out just for the sake of time as we go through questions. But do know, Brad, there's lots of love for your events and what you do in the entries we received.
Number one, the number of questions is amazing. Yeah, and all the kind words are very, very sweet and unexpected. So thank you.
And lastly, just a quick apology if we mispronounced your name or social media handle in any way. I'm sorry. We're going to do our best. But overall, again, we just so appreciated the engagement, especially since we only had the question period open for a couple of days. It was amazing to see the response. And thank you to everybody who chimed in.
I saw your post a few days ago, and I think I glanced at two questions. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I don't know what's coming. I have no agenda, no notes. So I'm looking forward to this.
All right, Brad. Now, it's been 8 years since you were last in Australia within the studio with MJ, and I'm sure you've circled the globe many times since then. Can you tell us how the seminars have evolved and what differences people can expect this time around?
I'm so excited to be coming back to Australia. I mean, going the first time was just an amazing treat. And I don't use the phrase once in a lifetime. I don't like that phrase, but it almost felt like a once in a lifetime trip. And being able to return is an absolute treat and an honor. How have the seminars changed? We've certainly brought some new segments in. I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and a very dear friend of mine was at my event. And afterwards, she said, Brad, it has gotten so much better. The delivery and the content.
Mhm.
I never try to put on a slick show. That's not what this is about. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. Back years ago, I think before I went to Australia, I did an event in Dublin. And I don't want to say we were getting full of ourselves, but we were like running two projectors and it was getting a little more automated. And I set the show up in Dublin and the whole thing crashed. My computer did a weird update and the whole thing crashed. And I had to just kind of go a cappella. I did the whole day just sitting on a stool telling stories and playing music. It was fantastic. And I've learned that that's where I need to stay. I mean, we do use video, we do use a little bit of production behind the scenes, but each event I genuinely try to do from the heart. And each event, has an effect on me. So it's as real as I can make it. And we rely very little on props and automation and much more on this was the Michael that I knew. So in terms of new stuff, it's not even a new segment. It's a whole new event called Mixing and Stories in the studio with MJ. And doggone is it fun. It's completely random. We have a number of what we call songs that we've stemmed out. What a stem is, instead of having 12 tracks of drums, we've pre-mixed the drums and put them down to one fader. And instead of having 16 tracks of background vocals, we've mixed them down to a stereo mix and put them down to one fader. And I literally bring a little, it's called a fader port, and we let people sit right behind the console, put their hands on the fader port and mix these songs. And if they want to listen to Michael solo for 4 minutes, they can listen to Michael solo. It's so magical. I clearly remember my first few days in a studio when I was like 21 years old, and that feeling of pushing a fader up and hearing drums and pushing a fader up and hearing keyboards. And it's very goosebumpy. It's a very cool moment. We kind of hand out a list of songs that they can choose from, or if they don't want to mix, I'll mix with them. Or sometimes I'll just do what I call critical listening, and I'll play an earlier version of a song that they love and really show them how Michael created these songs in a studio environment, or the closest we can get to a studio environment. And then I'll tell stories, and it's completely unscripted. The day just flows on its own. It's very organic. Right now, I would say it's my favorite event.
Wonderful.
I was just working on one of the new stems yesterday. We're just fine-tuning the stem for Billie Jean. And I'm sitting in my music room right now, and I have the Westlake speakers. Bruce Swedien gave me this pair of speakers that we mixed the Dangerous album on. And I was listening to the raw tracks of Billie Jean on these speakers yesterday. And it was just pure magic. It was pure magic. I can't pack everybody into my music room, but the closest that I can do is bring the elements with me on these events. So the Billie Jean one, I think, is going to be really popular.
Amazing.
I really have to say, I think you are the reason I got to start appreciating Michael's music in a new way, was because of the way you break down songs at your events. It is quite magical. I encourage everybody, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, please get to these events. And tickets are still available, we should say, too. And these can be purchased on inthestudioWithMJ.com. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
You have to kind of scroll down a couple inches, and I think it says purchase tickets or something.
Yeah.
And boom, it'll take you right there.
And these are going to go from late March through early April. Yes?
Yeah, we're going to be in Brisbane on Friday, March 28th, and also the 29th. Then we're heading off to Auckland. Auckland's going to be really fun. It's a 4-hour evening event. We've tried to keep the pricing as reasonable as we can. The evening event is really fun. So Auckland is going to be April 1st, no joke. Friday, April 4th, and Saturday, April 5th, we're going to be in Sydney. Now, here was my plan. We were going to go to Sydney and then just like chill out for a couple days and, kind of like be Aussie tourists. And crazy Melbourne just came out of the woodwork and said, "Why aren't you coming to see us?" So I'm leaving Sydney and we're heading straight to Melbourne. And I have a full day event on Sunday, April 6th. It's a lot of back-to-back events. It's going to be, for an American to go to Australia, it's a big trip. And I'm not going to lie, it's an expensive trip. And so this, really stepping forward and saying, yeah, we support what Brad is doing, it means a lot. Every single ticket means a lot. So we are pouring our heart and soul into this trip. So we do have some cool stuff coming up after that. But right now, 100% of our attention is on Australia and New Zealand.
Well, I am jealous because I still have not been to Australia or New Zealand. I will get there someday. I want to see all my beautiful MJ friends down there.
Come on down and visit.
As soon as my 2 kids can endure a very long plane ride, we're doing it.
I got one word for you. It's called Benadryl.
But this is a perfect segue actually into our first listener submitted question.
Here we go.
This one is from Twitter, from Samuel French. And Samuel asks, Brad, what keeps you motivated to keep going with the seminars? They're a huge investment of your time for assumingly little financial return. And you are, 11 years of the seminars at this point?
I think it's coming up closer to like 13.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think our first one was 2011.
Huh.
A great question, Samuel. Sometimes I don't know. I love it. It's an absolute, I guess, labor of love is the best word I can do for it. And I do appreciate you mentioning the financial, because it's always a bit of a difficult topic. We've talked about ticket pricing and things like that. I work for a living. I have a day job, if you can believe it. Part of my contract with the company I work for is that I take a lot of time off and I go do these events. These events are like fuel. I love travel. I love being in a new place. I love meeting new people. I've met a side of myself that I probably didn't know existed 10, 12 years ago. I'm not an extrovert, although my wife would disagree. It's just to be in a room full of people where politics, some of life's concerns, all of that is on the other side of the door. And you're really there just to celebrate Michael and share some stories and see the smiles and see the tears. It really is amazing. So it's a very kind question. I just love doing it. And I love, the way I phrase it is, I love introducing people to the Michael that I knew.
On a similar note, this question from Facebook from Julia DeVried. I hope I'm saying that right. Brad, you travel all around the world for In the Studio with MJ. I'm curious what your experiences are meeting fans from different cultures across the globe.
I know that name, Julia. I think you've commented on some of my stuff before, so thank you. As soon as you gave that description, and I'm going to try not to get choked up, I pictured a young woman in Budapest I first met several years ago, and she's a cancer survivor. And she came to my Budapest event several years ago, and she was beautiful. She's just a kid. And she was in the front row just beaming through the whole event. And it was clear that she was very sick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went back last year, and who was in the front row again but the same young woman? And she's beat it. She rang the bell, And it's just pure magic. Meeting these people who are real people. These are not just somebody that buys a ticket and sits in row 4. They're real people. I can't remember every name. I can't remember every face. But the fact that our lives can intersect for a few minutes and I get to know them and know that they love Michael's music and they appreciate what we're doing, it's beyond words. It really, really has a deep effect on me.
This question comes from Twitter from Alexander or Alexandre. I'm not quite sure which way to say it. He has sent us a lot of great emails and comments over the last few years. So thank you for that. And his question is, from the moment you worked with Bruce Swedien and continued for many years, how did your responsibilities evolve once you were no longer on coffee duty? Did Bruce like to have control, or did you have the opportunity to take on more?
Oh, man. All right, Alexander. Did Bruce like to have control? Yes, 100%. Yeah, it was not a committee. And that's important. And I teach that when I teach young engineers. Don't mix by committee. It's your fingerprints. Get in there and do it. If there's sort of a veiled question in there, did Bruce kind of scoot over and let me kind of co-mix some of the songs? Absolutely not. And I've never claimed that at all. I did a lot of recording. I did a lot of, Bruce and I would have some great conversations. But no, it was not a team. And by the way, Bruce was wonderful. So don't take that as a negative at all. I'm saying that as a positive. I think the fact that he was so dedicated to making sure the mix was perfect for him, I think is great. That's how it should be. Bruce and I first met, he was working on a project called Running Scared. A film came out in the mid 80s. And he was doing the soundtrack for it, he and Rod Temperton. It's a remarkable soundtrack. It's got the song Sweet Freedom by Michael McDonald and just a bunch of great songs on that album. And that's when I first met Bruce. I was the coffee dude, as Alexander put it so perfectly. So that's when I first crossed paths with Bruce. And we became friends. I'm Swedish, he's Swedish. We just kind of had that core commonality. And he knew that I was serious. And so over time, I was one of the kind of assistant engineers on the Bad album, but I wasn't the right-hand guy. Craig Johnson was Bruce's technical director on that project, and Craig is great. Craig went off to do Saida Garrett's album with Rod Temperton, and Michael needed Bruce to keep working on dance mixes for the Bad album. So that's kind of when I took that chair. We were working on the Bad dance mixes, and then we were going to start Quincy's album, Back on the Block. Big project, amazing project. And I had to fly to Florida to go to my brother's naval graduation. And I told Bruce, I said, okay, I'm going to go to Florida. I'll have my pager. And this was back before cell phones. He said, Brad, you're fine. We're not going to start Quincy's album for 2 weeks. I said, okay, perfect. Go to Florida. It was like my first time going to Disney World. Deb and I were newlyweds. Mm-hmm. We did one day at Disney, and I get like 15 pages, beeps. And Bruce is like, you have to come back right away. We're going to start Quincy's album. And I'm like, what? So I had to rearrange my whole week, catch a flight the next day, flew home by myself. They picked me up at the airport, went to the studio, set the studio up, set up all the tape machines. I'm like running on no sleep. Bruce came in, put his briefcase down. I don't think he was there 45 minutes. And he said, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And he left. And it was a test. It was a straight up test. And I'm like, you are such a mean guy. But, whether you like it, that was Bruce. Bruce played hard. And I passed the test. It's a little bit old school, but that was the kind of dedication you had to have to work with these guys.
That's a great story.
Okay, and there's a follow-up to Alexander's question over there on Twitter. Sounds like one of Bruce's greatest assets were his ears. If when playing back a track Michael said, hurt me, would you all be running for cover to protect your ears?
Yeah. Here's how it would work, Alex. Great questions, by the way. Bruce would mix at very specific volumes. And I think probably a little bit loud to the average person, but they were very predetermined how loud. But yeah, when it was time for Michael to come in and listen, Bruce would leave. He'd say, all right, Brad, I'll see you in a while. Then, yeah, Michael would just dime the knob. It would be 100%. And yeah, it was just ridiculous. You'd put headphones on and cup your hands over the headphones. And that's how Michael loved it. When he wanted to hear it loud, he really wanted to feel it. Hurt me, hurt me. He really loved loud music. And so when he would sing, he'd have his headphones like shaking on the table. They'd be so loud. And I'd be like, there's no way he's actually going to put those on his head. So we would blow through about one pair of headphones a week, usually the AKG 240s or whatever they were. And we would just blow them up. And so finally we decided to try, I'm going to get just a little techie on you just for a second. If you take two speakers and hook them up out of phase, where you've got the plus wire going to the plus speaker on one side, but you've got the plus speaker going to the minus wire on the other side, what happens is you get what's called phase cancellation. And so there's a point where the two sounds will literally just cancel each other out and there's silence. That's really fun to play with. We actually set up two giant tannoy speakers in the studio at Michael's microphone, and we had them phase cancel just 6 inches behind the microphone so he could have the music coming out of speakers instead of headphones at as loud as he wanted. And in theory, they would cancel out at the microphone. In reality, it didn't really work. It was fun to play with, and we had a bit of fun with it, but we had to switch back to headphones pretty quickly. But that's kind of stuff that we would do, and we had the budget to do it. So for all of you that are curious, we finally landed on Fostex T20 headphones, which if you have some desire to just blow your ears out, the T20s are a good way to do it. It just hurts me when I see kids, with, little earbuds just cranked, because it's like you only get one set of ears. That's all you get. And if you damage them, you're done. So even though we probably didn't help Michael's overall hearing, we were there to do a job.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how was Michael's hearing? I mean, he had to have wrecked his ears, right?
Yeah, but I've had so many conversations with him just at normal speaking volume, and either he was a really good lip reader or, I mean, he's not superhuman, but he was still able to have normal, fun conversations. He wasn't like leaning in. What did you say? I mean, there was none of that.
Mm-hmm.
He had to have had some damage. There's no doubt, but he did a good job of hiding it.
All right. The next question is from Gratian Demek over on Facebook. And he asks, I think Michael's vocals at the end of Earth Song are the greatest a singer has ever recorded. Were you present for that moment? Or what, in your opinion, was the greatest MJ vocal you ever witnessed or worked on?
You're just going to either hate me or not believe me. I don't remember if I was there. I mean, the vocals, they're very complicated because there'd be several days of background vocals and lead vocal. So I'm assuming he's talking about the lead vocal on Earth Song. And I think we did that in New York. I'm pretty sure we did at Hit Factory. I may not have been there that day. I was probably there for the background vocals, I'm pretty sure. Every Michael vocal was amazing, but I was there for so many that I don't always remember every specific one. My favorite MJ vocal, it's going to be a little bit, hopefully not corny, but when Michael sang Man in the Mirror, I was sitting on the couch. I can still picture the couch. I can picture the whole room, Westlake Studio D. And I was sitting on the couch in front of the console watching him sing Mirror. Saida was there, Rod was there, Quincy was there. That was pure magic. That was a really, really, I mean, I was so young. I was just pretty new on the team. There were some of those days when you knew you're kind of watching history be made. And that was definitely a very powerful, amazing day.
Incredible.
Yeah, I think any of us, we dream about being at a moment like that. It's incredible that you were.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Blue Sky, which is our newest social media platform, by someone named Jamin Ball. He's chimed in a few times. So Jamin asks you, Brad, how involved was Teddy Riley in the Dangerous sessions? And did you witness Michael and Teddy working in the studio together and crafting tracks?
Oh, wow. 100 million% involved. Teddy jumped in with both feet and both arms and an entire crew and a semi-truck full of gear Teddy was extremely involved. This was not a part-time job for him. It's funny because I have kind of some fun video that I share that Teddy was so young. He's like in khaki pants and a long sleeve white shirt, not rock and roll at all, but 100 million% cool. And he and Michael connected on such a fun level. And he's done 100 interviews. I mean, it's pretty easy to hear him talk about it, and I'm not going to speak on his behalf. But yeah, they deeply connected and genuinely liked each other because his working style was so different. I go into pretty good depth about this when I talk about the Dangerous album, the three producers. And if you haven't really explored the Dangerous album, you're listening to three very different producers, Bruce Swedien, Bill Bottrell, and Teddy Riley. And of course, Michael was the executive producer. The difference in the sounds of those three producers and their styles, the whole thing fascinates me. And it's kind of a big part of my seminar is talking about those gentlemen. But Teddy was, man, you talk about dedication, not working 24 hours a day, but pretty close. He jumped into that 100%.
Do you have any specific memories of seeing them in the studio together? You kind of mentioned the energy between them.
Well, here's the thing. On the Dangerous album, 85% of my time was split between Bruce Swedien and Bill Bottrell, and I would float between their rooms. It's not that I didn't like Teddy. It's nothing like that. Teddy didn't need me. Teddy brought his entire crew from Virginia Beach, and we set them up over at Larrabee Studios. So they were a couple miles away we were over at Record One. And I would go check on Teddy. I mean, it was certainly, we were all working, towards the same goal. With Bill or Bruce, I was an integral part of the process. With Teddy, he knew how to make a record, and he didn't really need me. And it took me a minute to kind of warm up to some of Teddy's songs. Teddy was working on a song called Drives Me Wild, and he was over at Larrabee Studios, and I just didn't like it. It was just all these pipes clanking and cars starting and engines. And I'm like, what is this? We're making, where's Liberian Girl? Where's Lady in My Life? What's all this clanking? It didn't really have a melody. If you listen to that song, but kind of take Michael's voice out of the equation, it's just a collection of sounds. And I know I sound old and cranky or whatever. I hope not. But I very intentionally put myself in the studio when Michael was going to sing the lead vocal. And I went over and I sat on the couch. Sounds like that's all I did was sit on couches. I probably went over and, sat in the back of the room because Teddy had his team, man. It was a well-oiled machine. And Michael started to sing that song. And for the first time, I could hear the melody. And I got goosebumps then, and I have goosebumps now. It was so cool to hear Michael bring his talent on top of Teddy's amazing talent and put the two of them together. And it's like, okay, now I get it. I mean, some of the other songs, Remember the Time, I think, were beautiful from the beginning, but that one took a minute for me to warm up to. But man, it turned out to be a really, really beautiful song.
Kind of piggybacking on that, we actually have one other question from our very own Jamin. So Jamin asks, was there ever a released Michael song where you got the sense that he, as in Michael, wasn't fully happy with the finished product? For example, famously, Michael is on the record as feeling that way about Wanna Be Starting Something.
We used to joke, especially during the Bad album, that, if Michael and Bruce had their way, we'd still be working on the Bad album.
Right. Yeah. Was there ever a finished version for Michael?
Yeah. You want to just keep pushing and pushing, but not really. When you're there for what's called the mixing and the mastering, that final day when everyone's exhausted, you've been up for 36 hours, you're piecing the last pieces together, and you're so tired you didn't know you could be that tired. But there's also this euphoria of this is an amazing project. Yeah, I mean, there's never a sense of, oh, gee, I wish we could have done that one again. Or by then you're just happy that it's done, and you're happy that the product is everything it can be to that point. Michael and I never really had any side conversations of, gee, not really digging that one, but I guess we're going to go with it.
I imagine, though, ending work on some of the songs, it just had to be ended because there was a deadline, right? I mean, otherwise, there probably would have been eternal work on some of the tracks.
Well, I mean, I still have some of the faxes from the Dangerous album with skulls and crossbones on them from the record company. I mean, we went a year over.
Right.
The Dangerous album just went on. We were on that thing for 22 months or whatever it was. Yeah, at some point you got to let it go. You just have to say, okay, this is all we can do.
So our next question is from Facebook from Andrew Green. He writes, Michael was known for pushing boundaries with his work. Can you share a behind the scenes story where a last minute technical challenge forced you to innovate on the fly and how that unexpected fix ultimately elevated the project you were working on?
Man, that's a good question. How about if I change the word technical to vocal?
Sure.
We were working on a song called Keep the Faith, and Michael, over the course of time, he was having a challenge hitting a couple of the notes in the first line of Keep the Faith, the first few phrases. And he was really struggling with it. And we wound up having to change the key. We had to lower the song down to a different key that it was originally recorded. It took several hours, and there's a lot more behind the scenes stuff that I just don't have time to go into. But it was a hard day for Michael because even though he had recorded the demo months and months earlier and nailed it, when it came time to do the real vocal, his voice had changed just a little bit and he wasn't able to hit it. But we had to completely re-record the song in one afternoon. It was a synth drum machine based song. So it didn't, it wasn't an impossible task, but it was a technical, we definitely had to kind of put on our both thinking and speed caps to get it done and get it done the way that Michael wanted it. But he was able just to demolish that vocal. And to this day, it's one of my favorite vocals. In fact, now I'm starting to think about it. I probably should have used that song as an example for an amazing vocal. To me, when Michael closes up Keep the Faith, some of those final ad libs at the end are just, you've known me long enough to know that I don't play. That stuff is just off the chart.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that we had to rebuild the song and he had to re-sing it in a key that was just made for his range definitely elevated the song from what it was previously.
All right. The next question is from email from Louis LaRoche. And the question is, having been in the room while working on the History album, can you tell us any stories of Jam and Lewis at that time? Because they seem to be absent from a lot of conversations about the album, despite the fact that they worked on 4 songs, Scream, Tabloid Junkie, Too Bad, and History, or 5 if you count Is It Scary?
Man, this guy knows his discography. Jam and Lewis were there, not a lot. He does make a point. I mean, they had flight time, so they were settled into Minneapolis. The whole History album, it was a very complex album. We kind of did the math one time, and I think we had something like 13 studios going at the same time in LA, Virginia Beach, Minneapolis, New York, Queens, and Atlanta, and maybe even a little bit at Criteria in Miami. I can't remember. This was kind of before the days of sending massive files over the internet. You were literally FedExing tapes. So Jam and Lewis were there, especially for the Scream vocals. They were there for a moderate amount of the production, but I think they were just more comfortable working at flight time. So I don't have any crazy wonderful stories. I know with Too Bad, some of Jimmy's guitar stuff in both Too Bad in particular is just crazy. But I can't remember how much that he did in New York versus how much he did in Minneapolis. Tapes and people were flying back and forth all the time, but they were very, very deeply involved in that project.
Over on Instagram, we have a question from Connor Jake Elder, who asks, did you ever discuss They Don't Care About Us with Michael? Did he ever discuss his thoughts or opinions when recording the track? And then there's a little PS here. I'm hoping that he let you know the ad-libs near the end of the song, what the vocals were. It's a long debated lyric in the fan community. don't you sit back and watch the beating is the widely accepted phrase he uses. If you're familiar with that part, that's the "don't you sit back and watch the beating," or something like that.
I'd have to go back and listen to it. I don't know. MJ fans don't really like when I say this. We really didn't talk about the lyrics. I mean, especially on the History album. I mean, some of the lyrics, in DS and some of the songs are just, it's like, are you really saying that? It wasn't really our place to sit and, ask about lyrics or dissect songs. And honestly, he would go out and sing vocals on a song like They Don't Care About Us. And it's not that he didn't. I mean, when he was singing, I mean, it was real. It was 100% time for work, and he's nailing the vocals. And then he's going to come back into the control room, with, a bag of popcorn and be tossing popcorn at us. And I know it sounds kind of odd, but yeah, there wasn't really a time when you'd kind of sit and stroke your chin and say, boy, that was kind of some really heavy stuff you were talking about there. You want to delve into that a bit. I won't speak for everybody. It's just not something that I did. He was performing, he was singing and writing from the heart. And then you'd kind of flip a switch and we'd be throwing jelly beans at each other. I know that sounds odd, and I did have a lot of serious conversations with Michael. One song that we did talk about, and it's not going to be for the reason that you're thinking, is Scream. And forgive me if I sound like an old prude. Please, please, please forgive me. I'm not. But this was back in the day of the Tipper Gore. Remember the parental protection thing, whatever it was?
The parental advisory sticker.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, you'd get the sticker. Well, this was the first time that Michael was dropping the F-bomb on a record.
Right.
And he and I talked about it. I wasn't against it. It was nothing like that. I just said, has anybody talked to you and said, if by chance you get the sticker, it could have a negative impact on sales? And he really had almost no concept of that. And it's not my job. I'm not going to, throw flags on it. He was sometimes sheltered from certain things. And so we would talk about stuff like that, talk about other artists, talk about all kinds of stuff. But yeah, we didn't really sit and dissect lyrics. There is one song called Monkey Business where one of the 99 hats that I wore on the Dangerous album was I wrote all the liner notes. Michael kept a really small team. The people that were actually in the studio, it was a pretty small number of people. So part of my job was, as he would sing songs, I would sit with my little Mac Classic and type the lyrics, from his scribbly notes. And then I'd have to go through the lyrics with him and make sure that I transcribed them right, because I'm that kind of a guy. And I sat with him in a little lounge at Larrabee Studios reading the Monkey Business lyrics, I caught your mother, she doing the do. And I'm going, okay, now is do spelled D-O or is that D-E-W? And we're just laughing because I'm like, you don't talk this way. Yeah, so that kind of stuff. It was just a very comfortable working relationship that we had.
So our next question is kind of a combo because we got two very similar ones on Twitter from JK0603 and on Instagram from LJP4681. And the combined question is, Michael was a well-known jokester. Did he ever play a memorable prank on you or do something that made you crack up along with him? Or did you do something to make him laugh uncontrollably?
The truth is, in the studio, you weren't going to be throwing cream pies at each other. That doesn't really work in a recording studio. It was more of an ongoing sense of levity. Some of the funniest stuff that you could do with Michael would be, sitting at the console with him. I don't know why. We always had Altoids in the studio, the little breath mints. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to have bad breath in a recording studio. And you wouldn't say anything, but you just take an Altoids out of the can and put it onto a fader in front of him. And then he would take one out of a can and put it in the fader in front of you. And nobody would break. You would just sit and do just these stupid things. And he loved that kind of stuff, kind of more subtle humor. Again, you're not going to be throwing water balloons around in a recording studio. We did throw water balloons in the Hit Factory in New York after he and Lisa got married. And there was the press in front of the Hit Factory knowing that he was there, and he was hanging out the window with water balloons. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't throw water balloons at reporters. That's just not a good idea. And I think he still wound up chucking a couple of them. But I mean, at Neverland, yeah, we're throwing water balloons at each other. But the humor was more subdued. We were recording the song Childhood, and this was in New York, 1994. And we had the kids' choir out in the studio. And I was out in the middle of the kids' choir with a video camera. And I was just kind of capturing some of the kids. And it was just probably 14 kids and the choir director and me and Michael. And Michael was sitting on a stool. And every time I'd kind of look at him or point the camera at him, he'd stick his tongue out at me. And we would both laugh. And it was just stupid things like that. You know, we're both at that point, he was in his 30s and I was in my late 20s. And you just don't have a friend that you can kind of be silly with. And he loved silly. If we would have let him throw pies in the studio, he probably would have. But he did respect studios and the studio space. So it was just more of a friendly banter, knowing the right thing to say at the right time, keeping it light, keeping it fun, doing little Altoid pranks or whatever. And to me, that's funnier than a pie in the face. But yeah, we weren't like putting firecrackers in Coke cans, and leaving him out by the vocal booth. But you just didn't do that kind of thing.
A question over on Instagram from, I think it's Etabe. In one of your videos, Michael was drinking tea from a mug with the spoon still in it. Was there a time he spilled liquid on the board or broke studio equipment?
No, I mean, he didn't dump his tea into the console or anything. Michael was very respectful of the studio. You know, we weren't like throwing pies in each other's face. There was one time when we sprayed silly string on him out in front of the studio, and he didn't like that very much. That didn't go very well.
He didn't like that? That surprises me.
It's a bit of a funny story. I've told it before, so I'll tell it briefly now. It was his birthday, and we surprised him at Record One. We kind of hid inside the door, and we waited for, I think Miko was driving him, and we waited for him to come up, and we all jumped out, and he sang happy birthday to him and just covered him in silly string. I think it was Matt Forger's idea. I'm not sure. I mean, he didn't get mad. He was laughing, but he ran to the lounge and, and kind of locked himself in his lounge for a little while. As contradictory as this sounds, he never liked the spotlight being on him. I think it was a little too much. It was kind of like, stop, stop. And it wasn't that he was offended, but I don't think he was really ready for it. He didn't get mad or anything, but we all kind of, it didn't go quite as well as we'd planned.
We actually have a follow-up question as well, which is, what format did Michael prefer to listen to music on, and did he have a soft spot for vinyl records?
It's a good question. What format? I mean, CDs were what everybody was listening to. Yeah, he really wasn't much of a vinyl guy. That was kind of before the vinyl rage took over, and I love vinyl. I would say CDs and DATs. I built him a crazy music system in a 15-passenger van in New York. And it was the funniest thing. They would drive him from Trump Tower to the studio in this white passenger van. It didn't even have tinted windows. It was just this white van. And I put these giant Tannoy 12 speakers in the back of the van and a big power amp and a big power converter. And then he had a little DAT machine sitting on the seat next to him so he could listen to mixes, just full volume in this van pounding down the street. And, people would see him and they'd look and point. And the whole thing was just silly. But yeah, I guess his favorite format was probably either DAT or CD.
So moving on to our next question, which comes from Instagram from Chacho World Music. The question is, MJ seemed to embody music as natural as breathing. He didn't need to play instruments, but there are contradictory testimonials and credits of him doing so. Did you ever witness MJ playing an instrument? Was the grand piano at Neverland maintained in tune, and did he own other musical instruments?
I don't mean to laugh. He couldn't play the piano. He couldn't play the piano at all. He's got that picture where he's throwing his head back, and
Yeah.
it's like, stop it. He could poke out a couple notes on the piano. I'm not diminishing his talent at all, but no, he was not a pianist. He was not a guitar player. He could strum a couple chords on a guitar. He was an amazing percussionist, whether it's playing the bottles or, I mean, the percussion just never stopped. In fact, I'm sitting here with a notepad and a pencil and just, that kind of just constant tapping with a pencil on a notepad or on the console, and obviously the beatboxing was just constant. I mean, just constant. And it was just kind of part of the background noise, Michael beatboxing in the corner. Was the piano at Neverland tuned? That's a really funny question. I like that question. I'm probably going to say probably not. It probably wasn't out of tune very much, but we had a piano tuner in Hollywood. God bless him. I can't remember his name. Keith. His name is Keith. He tuned all the pianos in the studios. I'm sure Keith has long passed away. And he would ride a 10-speed bike. He was as skinny as a rail. He was probably in his 50s. And he would ride all through Hollywood, and everybody would hire Keith to come around about once a week and tune all the studio pianos. And he'd come in all sweaty, and his bike is leaning against the wall. And I don't think Keith made the ride up to Neverland. I don't recall seeing Keith at Neverland. But,
He didn't go up on his bike.
but Keith, if you're still around, man, good on you. You're one of the most fit people I've ever seen in my life.
Did he collect any other musical instruments or anything? Were they around the house?
Not really. Like guitar collectors. I've got a friend who's a guitar collector up in Montreal, and he's got, I don't know, 80 guitars, all beautifully displayed. No, that wasn't really Michael's thing. Michael had a Lynn 9000 drum machine. It was this immaculate red drum machine. It was custom painted red, and it was flawless. Didn't have as much as a thumbprint on it, not a scratch. And we never really knew where it came from. It would just, if we were going to start a new song, this red Lynn drum machine would just be in the studio. And it's like, how did it get here? Who's the keeper of the red Lynn drum machine? Matt Forger and I have joked about it several times. It's like, who took care of it? Because Michael would have lost it in 20 minutes, but it was his drum machine, and it was always there when we needed it. And then it would just disappear somewhere, and then it would come back 2 months later. So that might have been his primary keepsake instrument. I don't know.
LJP4681 asks on Instagram, when you were recording Michael's lead vocals, were you ever so overwhelmed that you made a mistake or forgot to do something while recording? Or I might add, or did anyone else as well?
I didn't. I'm kind of proud of that. But yes, there were times when Michael would sing. Brian Vibberts tells a story. I think it might have been Earth Song or Childhood. I can't remember which one it was. It was on the History album. Brian accidentally recorded over a couple tracks, and it happened. I mean, this was before the days of undo. This was real tape, and man, once you record, it's done. There's no going back. There was one on the Bad album, and I really felt bad about this one. Funny. But we were doing the Spanish version of I Just Can't Stop Loving You. And Michael and Saida were singing, and I forget who the translator was. It's right at the tip of my tongue. But they were singing in Spanish, and it was multiple takes. But it was a young engineer. He really shouldn't have been in this position. But what you do when you're recording multi-track is what's called arming the tracks, meaning you're kind of putting the tracks into what's called ready record. And then when you hit the red button, man, they're recording. It's moving. And he somehow left like, I don't know, 6 or 8 of the tracks in ready record. And then he recorded, and it just erased Michael's vocals. And these were in Spanish. So, I mean, it took a long time to get those vocals. I think I'm the one that caught it. And I said, you've got to stop the tape. And I reached over and again, I'm not trying to make the guy feel bad, but he was very emotional and devastated. I mean, you're in the room with Michael Jackson. You just recorded over some of his vocals. So I had to go talk to Michael, and I said, hey, you had a little technical problem. I think we're going to have to go back and redo some of those vocals. And Michael's like, okay, let's do it. I never saw Michael throw a temper tantrum. I mean, it's a studio. Mistakes happen, but yeah, the poor kid. So, yes, it did occasionally happen. But Michael was a pro and you just fix it and move on.
Another question from Alexandra on Twitter again. The second verse of Smooth Criminal is longer in Moonwalker than on the album or any subsequent mixes for the single. Was it part of the original recording
Ding, ding,
and
ding,
maybe
ding,
cut
ding.
out to fit the song on the vinyl or something like that? Or was it just recorded for the movie?
Good call. That was Alex, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job, Alex. Yeah, this is something I talk about just a little bit sometimes in my events. On the Bad album, we recorded Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Smooth. We recorded those to be about 8.5 to 9 minutes each because we knew, music videos were just exploding. Michael was the king of music videos. We had concerts coming up. So we were going to do dance mixes, extended mixes, radio mixes, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, there were a handful of those songs that we recorded really long, 8.5 to 9 minutes long. Smooth was one of those. When we got done with the Bad album, the mixing, Michael was gone. Boom, he's off to Tokyo, kicking off the tour. And that's when I kind of stepped in as Bruce's right hand. And that's when we really dug into Moonwalker and the dance mixes. So the answer to your question is, we definitely made Smooth Criminal longer for Moonwalker for the video. So, with the cat walking across the piano and that whole thing. So that was very intentional based on the upcoming choreography.
So there was no additional vocal recording. You already had that full verse. It just never made the cut originally.
Yeah. We had 9 minutes of Smooth Criminal with Michael vamping the entire thing. So we cut it down for the album. We didn't extend it for the video.
Got it. Next question over on Instagram is from DomoBoy92. Michael had an almost supernatural ability to layer harmonies and create entire arrangements using just his voice. Can you recall a session where he built a song purely from his vocal ideas before the instruments were added?
Yeah, it's a complex question. Nice job. I actually do a segment where we really talk about Michael's background vocals on a song called Liberian Girl. Yeah, Michael's harmonies and even his ability to copy his own vibrato. He could nail the vibrato over and over again, kind of like Not Human. Very few people can duplicate their own vibrato. That's a really unique skill. In terms of creating a whole song from vocals, I kind of get what you're saying. We wouldn't go to the effort of having him, record the whole bass and record the drums and record the guitar, with his vocal. It would be more, he would kind of just lay down a couple bars of it, kind of to give you the idea, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. So to the best of my memory, there's not like some vocal ad-lib version of, The Way You Make Me Feel, where he's singing all the parts, but he would sing the parts as we were recording them with real musicians.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know there's a few songs where he's, beatboxing, History album era and stuff like that, and he'll add all these parts, and then some of it will actually end up in the final mix. Do you remember anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in Scream, we would loop his beatbox all the way through it, and that's a really fun one that we break down in my Mixes and Stories segment. Scream is such a funny song because it's got, Jimmy's guitars and just crazy collection of sounds and hits. We were big into orchestra hits back then. But then tucked into it is just these beautiful vocal harmonies that he and Janet were doing. And just that blend of organic and mechanical was something that I think he was really good at.
So this question is coming from Porter Wolf on Instagram.
Hey, I know Porter.
He's really nice. I think he's working on his own project too.
He's just a nice kid. So.
Yeah. So Porter is asking a biopic related question. So he says, Graham King, producer of the biopic, interviewed people who knew MJ to develop the script. Considering they revamped Neverland for the film, did they contact you for any insights about the music systems, the Neverland collection, or any other insights you might have around that?
It's a great question. Half of the answer is yes, half the answer is no. I was involved in some of the consulting or whatever. I don't really do this very often, but I did have to sign an NDA So I'm probably going to kind of skirt the question a little bit. So I did have a minimal involvement. I can't really go into a lot of detail as to what it was about.
Okay, but they consulted you in some way, maybe, which is actually encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I wished I could have contributed more, but yeah, there's certain things they just wanted to make sure were correct.
Any thoughts you want to share about the upcoming biopic?
I'm really excited and I'm really hopeful. I mean, MJ the musical is just a remarkable show, and I could talk about that for 30 minutes. But yeah, I'm really hopeful that the movie is as good as I want it to be.
Yes, I have that same hope, as of course many fans do. I hope it stands up, and given some of the news around it lately, I hope they can still make it all work. So fingers crossed. And on the musical, of course, that's coming to Australia as well. Paul, you're going to see it soon, I believe.
Yep, it's already playing, so we're hoping a bunch of the MJCast crew can all come and convene in Sydney and catch up and see it and have a good time.
I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts after you see it.
Cool.
It's going to be in Sydney when we're there. And Deb and I just talked about it. We actually made our Sydney day in the studio just a teeny bit shorter that day so people could dash over and see the musical. I've seen it 3 times in New York, once in Hamburg, and I'm going to see it in Orlando, I think next week.
Cool.
I'm not MJ musicaled out, but I don't need to see it in Sydney, although it would be amazing to hear Michael with an Australian accent. In Hamburg, everybody spoke in German, and I'm like, this is so weird, but it's so cool.
This is like the stupidest thing, but I actually never thought about that with like the Broadway show in Hamburg. So all the dialogue they're doing in German.
Pure German, yeah.
I don't know why I never thought about that before.
And I didn't know. I mean, it was a roll of the dice. We're kind of like, is this going to be in English or in German? And now all the songs, of course, are in English. Yeah, it was the funniest thing. It's like, I'm glad I know the story because I couldn't follow this at all in German, but it was really fun. But I would encourage anybody coming to see my event, I'll get you out of there in time so you can go see the musical, but I'm probably going to be a bit short on sleep by then. So I'll probably pass this time, but what an amazing show. It's really, really fun.
So our next question is on Facebook from Gareth Morton. Could you expand on a comment you made recently in a radio interview where you said that Michael was not aging well and that you didn't expect Michael to live beyond 50 years of age? I realize the sensitive nature of this question and have no issues with your beliefs around this. I was simply intrigued to know more about why you thought this.
It's a good question. It's not a question that I run from. When I first met Michael, I was probably 21 and he was 26, give or take. He was 5 years older than me. And we weren't together all the time. I mean, there would be months and months and months when I wouldn't see him. And then, we'd cross paths again. We'd do another project together. I'd work with him at Neverland, and years go by. And as the time went by, it was always Michael. It was always Michael. I never saw the guy pop a pill. I never saw any improper behavior, nothing like that. But he was clearly fighting aging a lot. And I don't have the means or the desire to fight aging that way. And I hope I don't offend anybody, but it was clear that he was fighting it. He was trying to hang on to, how he looked when he was younger. And he was working like a maniac, just working his body. The sleep thing was an ongoing issue where he would, leave the studio at night and then he would keep working. He would just work and work and work. And your body needs rest. I don't say this with any pride. I'm not looking for a pat on the back. But I told my wife years earlier, I said, I love this guy, but I don't think he's going to live past 50. And I don't say that lightly. But it was just clear that there's some people that just age beautifully. But Michael was fighting it too much. And when you fight it too much, it sometimes doesn't work. And he packed so much into those 50 years, more than 100 other people might do in their lifetime. I was not shocked. I was hurt deeply, but I was not shocked when he passed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't run from, the hard questions because I think they're important. I think you need to see Michael as a whole picture, not just, through a certain lens. And that's what I try and do in my events, is really introduce people to who the Michael that I knew was.
We have another combined question. Porter Wolf, NV Jordan over on Instagram, as well as your favorite Hungarian podcaster, Nagito Alat podcast.
Oh, hello.
And the question is, how is your book coming along?
I don't mean to laugh.
And would you ever make a documentary to capture all of the information shared in the studio seminars using studio footage and everything else, so fans of future generations can still learn and enjoy?
That's very sweet. So for Christmas, my parents are both alive and thankfully healthy. And for Christmas, I printed off about 350 pages of just stories and ideas and unfinished bits. And I gave it to my dad because he's been pushing me hard to get the book done. And I said, look, it's not finished, but I at least want you to see it, be able to read what I've written so far. And he really appreciated that. It's coming. I try to put a little bit of time into it here and there. I don't have some big date in mind that we're going to release it, but I want it to be right. And I just want it to be a nice collection of stories. So I appreciate the encouragement. It's not done yet, but we've got a few hundred pages under our belt. So
As somebody who works in book publishing, I have to ask, are you going to self-publish this, or are you gonna try to find a traditional publisher? What's your plan?
I don't have a plan, but I'm probably leaning towards just self-publishing.
Mhm.
Let's see, the second half of it was a documentary. I mean, it's a fun thought, and we do work with some really talented, I guess you'd call them videographers. So yeah, I mean, we have recorded good chunks of our events, and in terms of turning it into something, there's really no plans, but we do have a lot of footage, especially when I have special guests. That's when I really try and do as much videography as I can.
All right, well, moving on to the next question from Instagram from Dane Thompson 8. The question is, what was it like when an album was finished? What would be the final finishing touch in the studio? And did Michael ever have some kind of celebration at the end, or would he just retreat and relax?
I'm running the 3 big albums in my head, how each of them wrapped up: Bad, Dangerous, and History. The Bad album, there's kind of a funny story. The Bad album is pretty unique in that it moved fast. It was definitely the fastest project I'd worked on with Michael. And we were most of the way done with it. And Epic Records is just, they're like wild horses that are ready to get this record out because they're following up on Thriller. I mean, you talk about pressure. There's just so much riding on this album. So they actually booked the Beverly Hills Hotel, the big ballroom there on Sunset Boulevard, and they were going to do this huge playback party. They flew in their executives from Japan, Brazil, all through Europe, South America, Africa. So it was this big, big event. I mean, every record suit you can imagine was there. So back at Westlake, we're 4 miles away, and everyone's like, well, who's going to do this thing? And nobody wanted to go over there. I mean, Michael's not going to go. He just wouldn't do that. Bruce didn't want to do it. Quincy's certainly not going to do it. So, so they're like, Brady, you go. I'm like, what? So they sent me basically as the young stooge, and we built this huge playback system in the ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel. I go in and I had this master tape in my hands. It was a safety copy. And of course, every table I walk by, every guy, just drop that off in my car. It's like, oh, shut up. But I threaded the tape up and played the whole album for them. And it was amazing. It was almost surreal to watch these middle-aged power brokers. I think for them, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're kind of seeing the dollar signs and they're like, holy crap, this is a really good record. And at the end of it, they gave a standing ovation, not to me, but to Michael's work. Of course, they wanted to hear it a second time, and my instructions were very clear: just play it once, get out of there. Because we didn't let anybody in. I mean, nobody was allowed into the studio to hear that record. So it was kind of fun to be there for the unveiling of it. And so in terms of were there parties? Not really. At the end of each project, Michael was gone, getting ready for a tour. So we would kind of shift gears, and I would start working with him on what's called tour prep. We'd be mastering the album and checking the early pressings. There was a lot of moving parts, but yeah, as odd as it sounds, we really didn't have, like on a lot of films, they have like a big wrap party. And we just really didn't do that. There wasn't time because now it was time for music videos and the tour. It all just kind of turned into one big blur of work.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the history album, we did have a big dinner. I do remember that. Michael wasn't there, but all of the kind of engineers and some of the musicians, we went and spent just a boatload of money at a Japanese restaurant, and he took very, very good care of us.
So now we jump over to a question from Facebook. This is from Camilla Mail Rudd. Camilla engages with us a lot, so thanks for this. What do you wish the future generations would learn about Michael so that they will understand him and what he stood for?
I mean, certainly the humanity of his music. I'm coming at it a bit from an engineer standpoint more than an MJ fan standpoint. The production quality of his records is ridiculous. And I'm so proud of how those records sound. So when I teach at Abbey Road and SAE and these different schools, I really drill down on keeping a record real and trying not to overdo auto tune and pitch correct and drum correct and all that. I just think music needs to feel human. No disrespect to my young producers, but if I hear one more trap beat, I need to go take a walk and and, and I love the way our records sound. Yes, the emotion is there. Yes, Michael's human side, and they don't care about us, and Earth Song. His message songs I think are amazing. But even beyond that, I think if young listeners can really hear, man, these guys really knew how to make records sound good, and this sounds so different than the music my friends are listening to. That I think is important to me. On the humanity side, yeah, please. I mean, the guy gave ambulances to the city of Moscow and the countless hospital visits. And there was a young man that needed an operation, I believe in Budapest, and needed like ongoing medical care years ago. He was a very young child, and Michael paid for it year after year after year. Michael helped so many people behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And even I learn, when I travel and I meet people and I hear these stories, I didn't know them. Michael didn't walk around in the studio and say, man, I just, wrote a check for somebody to get a liver transplant. I'm not trying to be funny, but we just didn't talk about that kind of stuff. He just did it. And that's why I love Neverland so much, because the people that I saw and the stories and the Make a Wish and the different groups that he would have up there were just remarkable. And that's the stuff that goes beyond, oh, wow, isn't the Thriller video cool, to, my goodness, this guy was a really, really unique human being.
Well, first of all, I really like that you came to that question also from the studio side and recognizing that part of Michael's work. So thank you for that. And then on the humanitarian side, that comes to my next question, leads right in to a question on Facebook from Paul Dwyer. Now, many people know Paul. He's known for really being like the person to document Michael's humanitarian efforts in both his book, which please go check out if you don't have a copy, and also in his podcast he's been doing. He collects these really great stories.
Yeah, I know Paul.
To follow up on just what you've said, did you ever actually accompany Michael on any hospital visits, or did he ever speak to you about this side of his work?
The answer is no. The answer to the first question is no. Yeah, I mean, when he would do the hospital visits, I mean, we can all stroke our chins and analyze, gee, was this a press event or was it real? I think it was a combination. I think he loved doing hospital events and the word would get out. No, I never tagged along for a hospital event. I, I did bring him to the hospital. We had a little accident in the studio during the Dangerous album, and a gobo fell on his head. And I had to drive him to, it wasn't a hospital, but it was his doctor's office. And so that happened. That was kind of nutty. He was a complicated guy. I remember when the Gulf War broke out and there were a few of us in the lounge at Record One, including Michael, that just sat and watched, this war unfolding before our eyes. And I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not going to take sides. It was more a matter of, how is this happening again? Why are we sending young men to get killed? And that kind of stuff you could see just hurt him deeply. I don't want to sound surface, but we really didn't delve into a lot of political or heavy conversations about, I just met this young boy that is in stage 4 cancer.
Mhm.
I think the studio was really a place where he came to work, and he loved kind of the cocoon feel of it, the safety and isolation from the outside world.
So this question comes from Twitter by Hanan Lukili. And Hanan asks, how do you feel about this consistent, obsessive attempt by the media to tarnish MJ as a human being and therefore diminish his legacy? I realize that's a big question, but would love to hear any comments.
I don't know how old Hanan is, but during the 90s, when, Enquirer and What a Star or whatever, I mean, that was just the heyday of just, chasing after Michael and just the ongoing craziness of it. I actually think it's diminished dramatically since then. I think with the introduction of MJ the Musical, and I think as people get to kind of step back from it, or young people who didn't go through that whole era of crazy, I think it's a fraction of what it used to be. I did an interview in Sweden years ago. I'd only been doing my seminars for a couple of years, and I did an interview in Stockholm. And the interview I thought went really well. It was in English. And at the end of it, the lady started speaking in Swedish for about 3 minutes. And I didn't know what she was saying. And then I got up and shook hands and left. And people told me after the fact, they said, yeah, your interview was great. But afterwards, she went on this little tirade about, of course, this was a man that was, accused of molesting children. But she kind of backstabbed me in a different language. And I'm like, well, that's kind of cold. So I think there's still that, there's people that unfortunately, they heard that for so many years that's the immediate association they have with Michael. And it's not my job to change every single person's mind, but I do love, when they'll engage and allow me to share my insights. The man that I knew, there's not a cell in my body that believes that he could have or would have hurt a child in any possible way. The media is the media. And they don't call them headlines anymore. But if the little made up story about Michael is going to get a couple of clicks, some of them are still going to do it.
All right, next question over on Facebook. From my friend Paul Rizzo. After the theft leak, does it hurt or annoy you when you see MJ impersonators performing leaked songs like Chicago 1945, for example?
I haven't seen an impersonator do that. MJ impersonators. When I started doing my events, they kind of turned me off. And in fact, I kind of regret it, but I actually had a rule. If you came to my event, don't dress up like Michael. And this was early when I was first doing the events, because it was so distracting to me. I'd be looking at somebody dressed like Michael, and I'm talking about Michael. And I have come full circle, and I mean that. I have some wonderful friends who are MJ, I forget what word they like.
Tribute artists.
Tribute artists. Thank you. And man, they are sweet people. I mean, the ones that I've encountered, and I'm not going to mention names, but I think you know who you are. I think to dedicate, their life basically to celebrate Michael's legacy and his music. And, if they're doing some of the leaked stuff, whatever, I don't really pay attention. But I have come full circle on my position on MJ tribute artists.
Wonderful.
And the theft leak, whatever. Yeah, it's still a bit of a sore spot with me. And I don't talk about it very much. I try to be a silver lining kind of guy. I think we put on a really unique presentation, and there's a teeny fraction of the MJ fan base that's ever going to be able to see it. I'm not trying to puff it up or anything, but some of those things that were leaked, it really did hurt. But I just have to accept the fact that, they're out there, and if people are enjoying them, it's in my rearview mirror. The only thing that frustrates me is when they're taken out of context, because there's some beautiful stories that are around some of those songs and things that leaked, that it's unfortunate if you just experience it on a 3-inch screen and not have the whole context of what you're really seeing.
Right. Another question from Connor Jake Elder on Instagram. Did Michael ever discuss his thoughts on Walt Disney with you? I know both of you shared a love for Disney. Keen to hear if Michael ever spoke in depth about Walt with you.
It's so funny because we talked about everything. Well, I'll give you one example. Michael knew that I love Disney. Michael knew that I proposed to my wife at Disneyland. He loved that. And when we did the song History, which I think is a hugely underrated song, what a beautiful piece of work that is. And at the end of the song History, you hear all of the voices reciting dates. Well, those voices were us. Those were the people that worked on the album, the runners and the assistant engineers. And Michael very specifically gave me Walt Disney's birthday. He wanted me to have Walt's birthday, which meant a lot. Every time I play the song, I hear my voice. I think it comes out of the right speaker. And I don't know if we would really sit and talk, let's talk about Walt Disney, but we just talked about Disney and the Disney style. Especially working at Neverland, he was certainly reflective of the Disney quality all through Neverland. So yeah, we would talk about the Disney rides. I mean, I would come in on Monday mornings and almost without fail, he would ask me if I went to Disneyland the night before, because Deb and I used to hang out at Disneyland a couple times a month. So yeah, we would have just amazing conversations. He told me one time that I don't know if anybody knows this, but sometime after Captain EO, I want to say it was in the early 90s, he and I were at Neverland, and he got all excited and he said, "You know what they're doing for me at Disney?" And I said, "What?" And again, I don't know if this has ever come out, and I'm not trying to drop a bombshell or anything, but he said they were going to do a statue of him that was going to be in the park, and it just never happened. But he was pretty excited. And I was like, man, that's going to be cool.
Wow.
As it is, I go to Disneyland and we saw Captain EO so many times. And it was just so much fun to go into the Magic Eye Theater. I never saw it with Michael, which would have been pretty fun. But there was supposed to be, at least according to him, there was supposed to be a statue. And then I guess we'll just call them the allegations broke, and the relationship, I think, between him and Disney, I think kind of changed a little bit.
Another Instagram question from Simon Paul Wilkie. Could you name one thing while working with Michael in a studio environment that made it different compared to other artists' work environments you've experienced?
Holy cow, one thing. How about 99 things? I talk about this all the time when I teach. When I'm down in Australia, by the way, I don't know if you know this, I'm working with SAE, which is a premier.
Yeah.
They teach media arts, recording, visuals, all that. And so I'm actually doing daytime lectures at all the SAE venues. And then we're using their venues for my events that night or the next day. So I love talking to young recording engineers. Here's the funny thing is I kind of cut my teeth on Michael Jackson albums and watching Quincy and Bruce and Rod and Michael and the chemistry and the organization and the discipline. And I thought that's how every record was made. And I'm like, wow, what an amazing industry. This is just like clockwork. The studio was writing my checks. I worked for the recording studio. So I would work in whatever studio they would assign. So then I would be tossed on to another project. And I would just be like, this is chaos. This is how in the world did they get any work done? And it was the weirdest thing. And I'm not saying every artist was this way, but Michael's style was such a well-oiled machine, especially on the Bad album with Quincy at the helm. And yeah, then you would go into other studios and, the tapes aren't labeled correctly. It's just borderline chaos. So it was almost like everything was different. It wasn't just one or two things. It was the attention to detail, caring about if the machine was properly aligned, starting on time. I mean, that's a silly one, but Michael's sessions started at 12 o'clock sharp, bang. And there's a lot of rock and rollers that they have good intentions of, okay, yeah, we'll start at 12. Oh man, tomorrow I got to sleep in. Let's start at 2. Pretty soon it's 5. Pretty soon it's 7. And it's like all of a sudden you're upside down. You're not getting more work done. Michael was never that way. So There's a story that Bruce used to tell when Michael and Mick Jagger sang State of Shock. And Michael always did vocal warm ups. I mean, for 2 hours, 2 hours, he would warm up his voice with Seth Riggs. And Mick Jagger came in to do vocals on Shock. And he was just like ready to go. And Michael's like, well, you have to warm up. Well, Mick had never warmed up in his life. And next thing you know, here's Mick Jagger and Michael sitting at the piano with Seth Riggs doing vocal exercises. And that's just how Michael did it. But nobody else did. I never worked with anybody else that did vocal warm-ups. Yeah, so it's not one thing. It was basically everything. The way Michael did things was different than almost everybody else.
So this question comes from Twitter from Syntrone0. This person asks, why wasn't Someone Put Your Hand Out on the Dangerous album? Personally, I think it's one of the best songs from that era.
Oh, no argument. Agreed. Stamp. Done. It's a remarkable song. It's an absolutely beautiful song. I'm not going to get all sappy on you, but I tell people truthfully, and I'm being completely honest, that I don't listen to Michael Jackson music casually. If it pops up on my radio or my playlist or whatever, that's fine. I mean, I'm sitting in my music room and I have just stacks of albums and, Michael stuff, but I don't really listen to it very intentionally. But I do listen to Someone Put Your Hand Out. And my girls kind of tease me that when Dad wants to get in his feels for a minute, he goes up and plays one of his Someone Put Your Hand Out tapes. And it's an absolutely gorgeous piece of work. So I totally agree. That's the one song that I break the rule on of me not listening to a lot of MJ music, because I do listen to that from time to time. Why wasn't it on? I don't know. That and For All Time, the Steve Porcaro song, I think is just a beautiful piece of work. Yeah, so if it were me, if I could slide this song off the album and put that song on, I could very easily add those two songs, but I'm not the executive producer. So Michael knew what he wanted, and I think the work speaks for itself. It's a remarkable album.
Brilliant.
This question comes from Twitter from Emmett Gates, who asks, with the benefit of hindsight, which songs do you think did not fit thematically on Bad, Dangerous, and History and should have been excluded?
Oh, man. I mean, it's a very subjective question, and everyone would have their own opinion. I love the Bad album. Haven't you and I talked about Just Good Friends, right?
Oh, yes.
I love Just Good Friends.
I love it too.
People kind of clown on it. I mean, the one song that I wish would have been included on the Bad album is probably Streetwalker.
Mhm.
It was just such a great version that we had back then. In terms of bumping something off, I mean, I've said it in my seminars. I mean, another part of me, I love the song, but it always had the connection of EO and Disney for me. But 99% of the population had never heard it. So I think another part of me, I think, is a great song. I just probably prefer Streetwalker. On the Dangerous album, I mean, if I'm being honest, I mean, the Teddy Riley stuff I think is brilliant. It's just some of it's not my cup of tea. But Michael was looking, forward. And, so for me, something like Someone Put Your Hand Out is like, can't we please find a spot for that? But, it wasn't meant to be. The History album, it's a whole different vibe. It's more of an angry album, but I think it's an album that tells a really good story. Is there something I would leave off? I'm probably not a big fan of DS. It's just Michael being mad and he wanted to do it and whatever. I don't know. This time around, it's good. Again, it's just not my cup of tea. But there's also some just gems on there. I think Little Susie is just pure magic. A lot of times at my events, I'll shut off all the lights and I'll tell the whole story of Little Susie and the work that went into it and just ask people to listen to it with fresh ears. And I think Little Susie is a masterpiece. Mm. And it was super important to Michael. So that's what really matters. Good question.
Next, we got a short and sweet question from Eddie Santos on Twitter. Favorite song on History?
Stranger.
Yep.
That was easy. Yeah, Stranger in Moscow. It's a brilliant piece of work. Mm-hmm. Stranger in Moscow, it's a moment in time. Brad Buxer and I have argued about this a few times good-naturedly. The History album was primarily recorded in New York. And I was the first one there in the January of 1994. literally a snowstorm. I mean, it's like something right out of a movie. I'm out in front of the studio, ankle deep in snow. I'd already spent a few days kind of getting the studios ready for Michael. We didn't bring Michael into a studio until everything was ready. And we changed the locks. We had our own passcodes. We changed a lot of the equipment. I had to get it up to Michael's standard. And Buxer was the second one to show up. We're kind of setting up his equipment. And he says, Sundberg, you've got to hear this song. And he pulled the tape out of his pocket. It was a DAT of Stranger in Moscow, an early version. And it was just brilliant. It was just this beautiful, beautiful piece of music. And I called up Bruce Swedeen. Bruce was still in LA. And I said, you've got to hear this song. And I held the phone up to the speaker because that's how we did it back then. And I played the song. I think I played it for him twice. I said, you're going to melt when you hear this. And it's been my favorite song the whole time. It's a story that, Brad Buxer has talked about several times. He wrote the music for Stranger. Michael wrote the lyrics. And over time, Michael took credit for the whole song. It's a difficult story. Brad doesn't always like to tell that story, but it's true. Brad wrote the music for Stranger. Michael wrote the lyrics, but over time, Michael kind of absconded all the credits. But that's the music industry. Again, there's always more to a story than what's on the surface, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of music.
So we have one more question from Jamin on Blue Sky. And this is maybe a question we just simply cannot avoid in our moment right now. So thanks for any thoughts on this one. Michael Jackson and Donald Trump were hanging out a lot during the history era. Do you have any insight, Brad, into just how close the two of them were?
Not really. I was at Trump Tower. Michael had the, whatever you want to call it, penthouse number 2. You'd go up to the top of Trump Tower. I've been there a few times, and there's a hallway with 2 doors. One of them was for Mr. Trump's, and one of them was for Mr. Jackson. Michael rented one of them for many months. Mr. Trump never came to the studio. I never met him, but no, they were friends. Like I say, I keep I keep politics outside of my events as much as I possibly can. But at that time, I do know that, yes, they were friends. And to the best of my knowledge, they felt very positive towards each other.
Our very last question for you, Brad, comes from Twitter. This is from Maxim Claudia. And the question is, what is your favorite memory of your time with Michael Jackson? Any specific moments you would like people to know, which you haven't already mentioned in our great chat this afternoon?
I might go back to the Bad album. We were both so young, and there was kind of a point when I was employed by the studio, by Westlake, and I wasn't on the whole Bad album. I was tossed onto different projects. And then at night, Michael would always say, you're welcome in here anytime. I really like when you're here. I'm like 22. I'm a kid. And here's Michael Jackson, who just a couple of years earlier, I was watching at my then girlfriend house, Debbie, before we were married. We're sitting there watching the Thriller video and Billie Jean, and your brain is kind of like, that's who I was watching on TV a couple of years ago. And now we're having really fun conversations. And he's inviting me to hang out and watch him record. And it's not like a single moment, but it's kind of a collection. I used to work on a lot of TV commercials like Taco Bell and McDonald's, and we would do these TV commercials in Studio C, the music for them. And at the end of the day, I would go into Studio D where Michael was working on the Bad album. And I would just hang out. I wasn't really working, but Michael just he liked it when I would come in there. And I know that sounds self-absorbed or whatever, but it's true. And I remember walking in, I'd walk down that hallway. I can still picture it. And I'd hear the bass notes of The Way You Make Me Feel just pounding through the door. And I'd get so excited. And I'd open the door and Michael would jump up and give me a hug. And it wasn't every time, but it was that kind of a friendship where it's kind of like we got to be together again. And I don't know. I'd go, sit in the back and, we always had popcorn. We had these two air poppers and we would just popcorn all the time and everyone's trying to be healthy, but they'd put about a quart of butter on them. And it's more of a general feeling of being welcome and being like the youngest member of the family. So, he used to do the, Brad, really, really Brad thing, but it wasn't like just a specific moment. It was more just that feeling of, I'm actually welcome in this amazing place. And just on the other side of that wall, people have no idea what's happening in here.
Wow.
I really love that story, and I think it also is a testament to the fact that, at least in his studio life, Michael Jackson surrounded himself with people who he was organically in sync with and who he truly wanted to be around and whose visions were all aligned. It was clearly a safe space and a really brilliant and creative, amazing space for him. And just the fact that all the stories you have of these moments are great examples of that. And I think that's wonderful, especially, again, considering kind of everything he went through in the rest of his life.
To springboard off that,
Mhm.
and yeah, I kind of refer to it as the cocoon because it was such a safe, closed place. And you are spot on right. And I've talked about this before. Michael loved being around kind of what I call healthy family type people. And yeah, I mean, musicians are crazy. And, we loved when the crazy would come in bouncing off the walls and, different people, but kind of the core people, whether it's, Bruce Swedien, Matt Forger, Bill Bottrell, me, they're generally happy, married, secure, good people. It's funny, even when I list off the people on the Dangerous album, had something like squirrely been happening, as has been alluded to, none of these guys would have taken it. I'm not trying to be vague, but these are very good people. And Michael liked that. He liked keeping the family that he had built intact, especially in those years, just the security of familiarity.
Mm.
Brad, so I think we'll wrap up on that amazing note. Thank you again for taking so many questions and going so in depth with so many of these. We really, really appreciate your insights. Again, to anyone whose question we did not get to, I'm sorry. We truly had so many, but I am going to share these with Brad, and maybe some of these stories will pop up a little bit later. So keep your eye on his socials. With that in mind, Brad, is there anything else you'd like to let listeners know regarding your upcoming events, and also let us know where we can find you across social media for tickets and just following you in general?
Sure. This was really fun. It's always fun hanging out with you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing Paul again in Sydney in a few weeks.
Yay.
And the questions were great, and I'm glad they weren't all happy slappy, as they say. It's kind of fun. Michael was complicated, and it's kind of fun to dig a little bit deeper and, not just talk about, the snare sound on the way it make me feel. So nice job on the questions. Australia, New Zealand is the big focus right now. If you are planning on coming to see us in Australia or New Zealand, or if you just want to get a cool shirt, we've done some special shirts just specifically for the Australia, New Zealand tour, I guess, if you want to call it. And they're on Bonfire. So I suck at doing promotion, but if you go to bonfire.com, that's BONFIRE, bonfire.com store, and search In the Studio with MJ. And I think if you go to my Instagram, Maddie handles a lot of my social media, but I think there's a link in bio, I think is what the cool kids call it. But we've got special shirts just for Australia and New Zealand, because the truth is it's hard for us to haul shirts around. And I love that people love the shirts. But you can order on Bonfire, have it ready, wear it to the event, and I'll reward you with a firm handshake or hug, whichever you prefer. But the shirts are kind of cool. We are bringing a lot of other merch. It's just shirts are so hard because there's so many different sizes and blah, blah, blah. So Bonfire for the shirts. Yeah, we're looking forward to Australia and New Zealand. It's going to be a really amazing event. June, I've already announced this publicly. We're going to take a break in June and not go to LA. And I love the fact that it's kind of become part of the tradition. It's just, in talking to some of my friends, I think LA just needs a bit more time to recover from the fires. So we're going to do LA. We're planning on November. So we're not turning our back on LA in the least, but I just want to give it a minute to recover. But we're going to Frankfurt at the end of June. One of my daughters is getting married in mid-June, and I'm going to jump a plane and head over to Frankfurt. It's going to be a really fun event in Frankfurt at the end of June. Years ago, we had a huge event in Frankfurt at a studio called Cream Studios.
Mhm.
And you look at pictures on the internet, and it's like, yeah, I think this will work. And it was an underground studio. And it was the weirdest place. It was so hot. So I do have a better venue this time. Cream was wonderful, but this time we're going to be above ground at SAE. And then after that, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and then we're going to be in Oslo and LA in the fall. Last thing I'm going to mention is if you happen to be listening from Seoul, South Korea, I've got a group in Seoul that I would love to do something with. And I've kind of got something penciled out possibly for September. So if you're interested in helping coordinate an event in Seoul, please reach out to me. Our normal social media landing spots are obviously Facebook because I'm old. And then we're on Instagram and TikTok. I don't know if we're on Threads. I don't know. Maddie handles that stuff. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the MJCast. You guys have been wonderful supporters with us. Just deeply appreciate the ongoing support.
Well, everybody keep an eye on Brad's socials and websites for all that info. Very exciting. And yeah, thank you again, Brad, for sharing your stories and your time. And of course, we look forward to having you on the next time. Already looking ahead to that. And Paul, people traditionally cannot find you on social media, but is there anywhere people can find you if they want to reach out?
Only through the MJCast generally. Contact the MJCast, they'll find me. But yeah, I'm pretty off the grid and I like it that way.
Good for you.
Contact me and I'll text a screenshot to Paul.
Awesome.
For real. I'm not even joking. uh, and for the MJCast, of course, you can find us all over social media. And our newest platform is Blue Sky, where Jamin is primarily our main representative over there. But we try very hard to see messages and respond as much as we can across everywhere: Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, all the good places. We still are rebuilding our Facebook page after having it unceremoniously deleted a while ago. And so if you haven't found us again on Facebook yet, please come on over. And you can also, of course, email us at the mjcast@icloud.com. Also, feel free if you ever want some MJCast merch. What are we on? Redbubble. You can find fun merch over there. Otherwise, we love engaging with you guys. And, we're still at the start of season 11. We have some great stuff lined up, and we hope that you enjoy what we have coming up. And for any of you who do get to Brad's events too, please let us know what you think. We'd love to hear about your experiences and how it goes. And thank you guys again. This has been really fun, and looking forward to the next time we're all together.
Cool.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Paul and Elise. Always an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will just sign off by telling you all to stay bad.
Take care.
See ya.